During Taiwan's recent election, Tsai Ing-wen said that her government's policy will be maintaining the status quo with China. She said she will work within the ROC framework and accept the progress in cross-strait relations made previously while preserving freedom and democracy for the people of Taiwan. Tsai Ing-wen knows well that Taiwan cannot afford to be overly dependent on China. But the stable and relatively cordial cross-strait ties achieved under President Ma, 20 agreements, 600 plus direct flights a week, more than 4 million visitors a year, more than $100 billion in investments, should give her new government space and time in which to create a more comfortable distance from China without provocation. This is important to the United States, of course. The U.S. position toward Taiwan is fundamentally based on the Taiwan Relations Act, which has served as the basis for U.S.-Taiwan relations for the past now 37 years. It has been supplemented by 3 communiques and 6 assurances from U.S. presidents, but never amended. The basic principles in U.S. policy toward Taiwan and the Taiwan-China relationship are peaceful resolution according to the will of the peoples on both sides, including the democratically expressed will of the people of Taiwan. The U.S. is opposed to unilateral attempts by either side to change the status quo. It doesn't support Taiwan independence, but doesn't expressly oppose it. The U.S. welcomes dialogue and increased contacts and is committed to preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits. How will the Taiwan-China relationship ultimately be resolved? No one knows. There are things, potential solutions, that China could take, and it's good to take note of them. It could renounce the use of force against Taiwan. It could remove the missiles aimed at Taiwan. It could create space for Taiwan in international institutions. It could stop pushing unacceptable concepts like one country, two systems, and it could even acknowledge ROC sovereignty in Taiwan. The next big issue on the horizon for Taiwan and for the U.S. is the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. And it is something that we, each of us, can actually do something about. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a vital trade and investment agreement negotiated over the past 7 years and signed earlier this month in New Zealand by 12 nations, including the U.S., Japan, and Australia. Other nations, including Taiwan, can also join in the future if they first remove certain remaining trade barriers, such as Taiwan's ban on U.S. pork imports containing an additive widely accepted here in the United States and most other countries. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement came about and based on the recognition that trade creates jobs and lifts people out of poverty. When that happens, societies stabilize and economies grow. That's crucial, because stable societies are exactly what's needed to fight terrorism, strengthen democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, also has tremendous strategic importance for Taiwan, helping it to diversify its economic relations and avoid overdependence on China. China is not a signatory to the TPP. Instead, it is promoting an alternative, the RCEP, Regional Economic Cooperation Partnership, which starts with the ASEAN countries and adds China, India, and others. So what's at stake here is really a choice for the United States and the world as to whether the leadership for trade and investment in the Asia Pacific is going to be in the hands of the United States or China. In Taiwan, both the DPP and the KMT are in favor of joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Here in America, however, the leading candidates in both parties for the presidential nomination, Trump and Cruz in the Republican Party, Sanders and Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party, are at this time on record as opposing U.S. ratification of the TPP. That is a very serious matter for the United States, for Taiwan, and for the world. The good news is that a democracy is inherently self-correcting. Those positions are not frozen or set in concrete. In a democracy, after all, the people are sovereign. The voters can express their opinions and replace politicians who don't listen. Foolish policies can be changed, mistakes can be reversed. But to make democracy work, we must be a nation of participants, not just observers. So if you want to help Taiwan avoid overdependence on China, to help boost trade and investment in Asia and the Pacific under America's leadership rather than China's, please exercise your democratic rights by expressing your opinion. Write or email your California senators, Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, and your congressional representatives and the candidates that you support in this year's presidential elections, urging them to support American ratification of the TPP. They will listen to you, their constituents, and that's how, in a democracy, we can do our part. Thank you.
Okay, we would like to take this opportunity for question and answer. So anyone who would like to ask one question, please let us know. Anyone? Okay.
What is the prospect of TPP past the Congress?
Yes, the TPP, although signed this month by 12 countries, including the United States, is not yet actually in effect. It has to be ratified by each of the participants, or at least under the terms of the TPP agreement, within 2 years from this month. It has to be ratified by a minimum of 6 of the 12 original signatories, representing 85% or more of the trade in shared among the 12. We certainly hope that the United States will be one of those. In order for the United States to ratify, the process began, of course, with the signatory of the agreement, which was a power given to President Obama by Congress under legislation called the Trade Promotion Authority, so-called FAST Track. One of the conditions under that authority, however, was that the agreement signed has to be approved by both houses of Congress. So the expectation is that this could come up as early as this summer or after the congressional recess before the end of this year. And that's why it's so important now for us to let our representatives in Congress and the future presidential candidates hear from us. We recognize it's important to the United States and Europe for us to ratify that agreement.
Any other question?
Welcome, Chairman Parker, our old friend of Taiwan. How are you?
Thank you.
Just three questions. Number one, what is your expectation for the new President-elect, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen? Second question is, in next 5 to years, what do you think about Thai is favor for Taiwan or People's Republic of China? Number three, as a friend, an old friend of Taiwan, what is your best advisor for Taiwanese and Taiwanese American community? How can help their homeland, Taiwan? Thank you.
Thank you. Three good questions. First of all, my expectations correspond to my hopes. As far as Tsai Ing-wen and her presidency are concerned, I believe it's a very good sign that the DPP also won majority in the legislative unit, because that will help her to be effective, to get things done, and avoid the situation which we've had in this country and Taiwan has seen as well, where there's a deadlock and an inability for the government to function effectively. So I'm very optimistic on that side. Secondly, I believe that commonplace assumption among people that time is not on Taiwan's side, that it's on the PRC's side coming to an eventual resolution of this relationship is not correct. No one knows what is going to happen in the future, particularly in China. We look at the history of communist governments and we see that they don't last very long. The longest lasting one was the Soviet Union, and nobody thought that would come to an end, but it did. So what happens in China is domestically is going to be very important in terms of what happens in the relationship. And I think that from Taiwan's standpoint, my advice would be very similar to what Tsai Ing-wen has already announced, and that is maintain the status quo and steady as you go. Taiwan isn't going to provoke disputes with China as it tries to create a little more space. And I think that what we can do, answering your third question, really reverts back to the comments I made about the TPP. There's a specific example where we can speak as citizens to our representatives. And by the way, some of you, like my wife, may be voters in both Taiwan and the United States with dual citizenship. Well, you can let your representatives in both places know that this is something that you support and you encourage them to support.
Any further questions?